Welcome, everybody. Good morning again. I'm Gilles. I'm the product marketing lead at groundcover. Thanks, everybody, for joining. With me is Or, the VP of product.
Hi, everyone.
Uh,
Good to be here.
cool. So, today we're going to be diving into the fascinating word of logs. And yes, I did use the adjective fascinating to describe logs. To me, logs are like a conversation your applications are trying to have with you. They're trying to explain what's going on, and it might not always be easy or even possible to understand what they're trying to say, but at least they're trying. They come in different formats. They can be leveraged by multiple stakeholders in any organization, and also for various use cases. And although sometimes they're perceived as one of the most basic data outputs for your from your application and infrastructure, there doesn't seem to be one set of best practices that everyone is aligned on. So before we dive into all of these topics, which would also, by the way, include talking and showing how groundcover enables unique capabilities in log management, let's start by establishing some basic terminologies. Or do you want to kick us off by defining what logs are and what they're here to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of our audience is already going to know what logs are. We use them in the day to day. It's one of the key ways that developers and other types of personas at a company are able to get data from the application. It's really just any event or message that the software application goes and writes. It will always need to have some kind of timestamp and it will have certain data associated with it. But kind of the beauty about it and the risk about it is that you could throw absolutely everything in a log. And by extension, that kind of makes it very quickly the noisiest pillar of observability when we compare it to, traces or metrics that are things that are much more set in the way that they're structured. Logs could really go and be everything. But what we see with all of our customers and with our experience in this world is that they tend to be the lowest common denominator. Just everyone has them, and as such, we need to help and support everyone to get the best experience out of them.
Perfect. So typically, let's talk about who typically uses logs and how do they use it. So typically, you'll have your software developers and engineers on one hand, the DevOps teams on the other hand. And if we talk about software developers and engineers, they roll out new features all the time, and as part of the process, they have to make sure that everything is working properly during the development process. So they need to check that the application is not slow, throwing different types of errors, and when they do that, that's actually when logs come in. So developers will be looking for clues on what could be causing those different malfunctions, and logs are usually the first go-to. So logs is where you look for information about slow queries, about errors, latencies that affect your application's performance. It's all about finding and fixing issues before they turn into real headaches for your users. Now, DevOps teams are kind of the bridge between software development and IT operations, right? So they use logs for a slightly different purpose, which is optimization. So they will look at logs to fine tune both software and network performance, ensuring that everything runs smoothly and efficiently as much as possible. So I guess in a sense, DevOps teams look at logs to help prevent the next issue and proactively enhance the performance, while developers and engineers use logs to fix those errors that did come up especially in production.
Yeah, it's also beyond production on lower environments, right? Or right when you move out code to prod, you sometimes want to be able to get that kind of understanding that everything's working as expected, to get a feel and to kind of be able to debug in real time. And there's not many tools available to us that are more widely used than logs in order to do some of those activities. So I would say it's on the production side, of course, by developers, but it's also on kind of lower environments in staging and in dev to get that assurances that everything is working.
Right. So these are your classic customers, right, for logs. Now, in some organizations, especially where you don't have the right tools for this, logs can also be used by analysts and product managers to understand user behaviors, kind of like piecing together a puzzle to see what new features your users are loving and which ones they don't. And based on that information, the one that's found in logs, they try to assess that situation. But using logs for that purpose, as you know, you're the VP of product, so you know that pretty well. using logs for this purpose is far from ideal. It can work to some extent, but it's just not the best tool for you, right?
I think that's the risk in general with something like logs that could just solve such a wide array of use cases that you could really kind of abuse it. So there are tools and software that is much more specific for kind of those product analytics use cases, and you don't want to lean on something like logs. But there's other cases where you might be using it in order to go and write metrics, right? If you think of a log and you think of every time a certain behavior happens, every time that something happens by the application, I go and write it down. If I now change that, method of writing it, I say every minute I'm going to go write how many times something has happened. I've now moved from a log to a metric within a log. And as well, this isn't ideal, but a lot of companies will go and kind of jump to that in order to be able to go and set up those metrics in an easier way. And obviously, those are companies that don't have access to a tool like groundcover where you would get it all out of the box. And I think that that's maybe a symptom of kind of not the right set of tooling available to them when they go and jump to that, whether it's for kind of the more product analytics space or for the metric needs.
Cool. So let's talk about log levels for a minute, and let's do it briefly because I do want to go over this. But what are log levels? What do they represent? How can they be used?
Yeah, so I think just like we spoke about a second ago, logs could have a wide set of use cases. So with that, we have a spectrum of ways to flag every type of log into a certain classification. So you could go and say, I want to provide information on a certain log. It's something that doesn't actually represent an underlying problem. I just want to flag it. That would be an info log. You have a debug log. That was the use case I spoke to earlier, where developers want to go and to see what's happening within the code and to be able to use it for fine tuning. You have a warning that might indicate that something's wrong, but it's probably not going to be problematic to the point where it causes catastrophic risk, and then error, which in turn is like one level of severity above, where you want to go and to really take a look at it fairly quickly. And then you have these fatal classification, which basically means like the world is ending, the sky is falling, go and take a look at it now, make sure that it's taken care of, and then you'd have some kind of mechanism in order to potentially alert off the back of that and to be able to go and flag that in real time.
Right. So that's interesting. It seems to me like some of these would be for present use cases, like when you're developing the software, and some of them will be kind of forward looking. Looking into the future, trying to assess what the users are going to feel. Right.
Absolutely. So it's a bit of kind of you writing a time capsule to your future self or to future developers. So when we're talking about our present use cases, it's very bounded. It's like I have something now I want to put out. But when you're talking about logs that are going to be looked at down the line, you almost need to think a little bit about what context do you put inside there? How do you allow future you, future Jill to be able to go and to look at it? And when that issue happens, when that error happens, to be able to understand what to do, and kind of thinking that one step forward brings you to be able to reduce MTTR, mean time to recovery. If you have an issue, your apps, how do you bring it up faster and deal with it? So you're almost writing a message to future self, and you kind of need to think about that when you're going and trying to plan this moving forward.
Yeah, so that sounds very challenging, right? Because you kind of have to think about this as you're developing another, other tasks as well. And you always have things that are coming up that are urgent, that needs to be pushed out right away. So it's kind of a difficult task to balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like anything. We live in a world where we're constantly optimizing and prioritizing, and any given day, we know ourselves and all of our customers need to decide between 100 different things to do. But I think it's kind of like testing, where you wouldn't put out code without tests. So you wouldn't want to put out without the correct thinking about, how is your logging strategy around that. And it's one of those things as well where you don't want to go and look backwards. You want to go and piecemeal it. So as you're moving forward, to be able to go and think about it and work through it. So I think in general, that's the approach that I have to these kind of items that are ongoing, is just, bite by bite, being able to take care of it and move forward on it.
Cool. So for most of our listeners, I'm sure most of them will be deeply involved already in the world of log management. But I actually would bet that it would be hard to find two people online that use the same guidelines for log management. It's a bit of a jungle, when it comes to best practices, and every organization, hacks its way through this jungle, creating their own guidelines and rules, and it's shaped by many factors. It's shaped by budget, the team's expertise, the tools that they are using, and so on. But let's talk about a first crucial step, which I think is very important, is structuring your logs. So as I said earlier, logs are kind of a conversation your applications are having with you. Now imagine you're in a room full of people, and they're all talking to you at the same time. Some of them talk to you about, I don't know, yesterday's game. Some of them are talking about the episode that they watched last night on Netflix. Others are talking about their weekend trip with the family and so on. So there's no way for you to be able to listen to all of that at the same time, right? And now to make it worse, imagine they're even not even speaking the same language. So imagine you can group all of them together based on the topics that they're talking about and also the language in which they're trying to talk to you about it. That's basically what log structuring is. Structuring all your logs means that you can better extract and leverage log attributes. It's about turning chaos into clarity. Now, the tricky part about that is that not all logs are created equal, right? Not all can be structured, at least not easily. Now, it really depends on the format you're using for your logs. So let's just talk about a little bit about the different log formats that are most common. So you have your plain text logs, which are kind of the old school traditional logs. They're easy to read by humans, but they can really be a nightmare for automated processing. You have your structured logs, which are kind of the ultimate logs, I guess, in a way. They're the modern organized cousins, basically, of plain text logs. They use formats like JSON, and every piece of data is cleanly labeled and easy to parse.
Yes,
Then you have your
it might be worth saying as well that even kind of these things that you're classifying as structured logs are in and of themselves unstructured. And so it's about how do we go and create a culture within the company to structure those logs the same way so that enables all of these benefits to be able to search, to be able to go and to build off of them and to ultimately create assets that give some kind of value over there. And I think that's something that's hard to go and create within the company, but it's something that creates value as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good comment. So then you have your binary logs, and these are less common, but they're super efficient. They're like secret codes that only machines can understand. They're great for performance, but they're actually not great if you're a human trying to read them. And finally, you have your XML logs. So these are kind of the middle ground between plain text and JSON. They're structured, but they can be a bit wordy. They're kind of like the person, you say, "So how you doing today?" And their answer is actually the full story of how they're doing today without skipping any details. So they can create kind of an overhead if you're using those. Now, you might be wondering if we talked about structured logs and JSON formats. They're so easy to read. They're organized. They're easy to parse. So why isn't everyone using them? Yeah, it sounds like the perfect solution, right? But it's actually not that straightforward. So many legacy systems and applications were built with plain text logs in mind. So rewriting or updating these systems to produce structured log can actually be a significant task. And then there's the human factor, right? So for many developers and engineers, especially those that have been in the field for a long time, reading plain text log is kind of a second nature. So it's kind of a favorite for them. What do you think about that, or?
I think it's like anything else where obviously all have our history, whether that's in life, in legacy systems, and anything else. And it's about how do we look forward instead of necessarily looking back? How do we go and make sure that we're building in a way that we could optimize around how do we later consume that data, whether it's us talking to our future selves, whether it's us creating some kind of structure that the whole company could go and be able to speak in the same terms. And so it's an ongoing challenge with yourself to go and to make sure that you're kind of approaching it the best way. We see a lot of our customers go with the approach of JSON logging and being able to go and do that. And as a benefit of that, within kind of modern solutions, you're able to go and get things like search according to a hierarchy. You're able to go and to be able to build different types of aspects on top of it, reporting and so on, being able to pull different pieces, being able to go and really get the benefits of modern logging solutions, like in ground cover. So I think that aspect is really important. But there's other kind of like ideas here. So even if you have a really well built out structure to all of your logging, even if you're doing everything ideally in that aspect, you still may have issues that you encounter. You could go and be just generating too many logs. That is hard when something really happens to be able to go and kind of find that needle in the haystack of what do I want to go and look at now. So best practices in general, minimize, and obviously minimize is different for each and every company. That you're not going to be the same, and there's no number in mind, but if it's too much, it's too much, and you probably know that. And another aspect is like, how do we go in and centralize? How do we bring more and more of our application and company log data into one place, so that we'll be able to, at the moment of truth, to not have to look multiple places. Like, you could kind of think about it like if you went home and you placed your keys somewhere. If you placed it in the entire house, it's going to be really hard to find. If you always place it in the same area, you're kind of limiting that radius of where do you need to look. And in that moment of truth, in that time when you actually have an issue, you're going to want to limit that radius. So I think it's that aspect as well. And it's just about as well kind of adding that layer of common sense on it, making sure that you think and challenge a little bit, and try to go and over time keep a clean house.
So one of the things you mentioned here also is about minimizing the amount of logs, and I think that this is kind of a situation where many observability solutions out there kind of force that question, or looking into that for many users. The amount of logs, minimizing the amount of logs that they have for visibility, really limits their ability to then go on and troubleshoot and do their work properly. So you hear a lot about log smartly, but in effect, it's actually talking about minimizing the amount of logs that you cover, and it really becomes a quest to capture the right data at the right level of detail, which in many cases quickly becomes a random bet on when the next issue or where the next issue is going to arise from. And the challenge differs a bit depending on the type of solution an organizations depends to adopt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about the traditional kind of SaaS model that ground cover is trying to break, it basically says go and send all of your data out to some SaaS solution. They'll put it in their cloud over there, and they're going to charge you in a manner that aligns to their best interests. So every time you send them a line of logs, they're going to charge you for that. According to the retention rate that you want to set, they're going to charge you for that. If you have logs that you want to keep in their system, but you're not actively using, if you go and search on those logs, you're going to pay a rehydration fee on top of that. And you're going to need to go and to essentially have to take all of these inputs and figure out how do you do the different trade-offs? How do you decide what should have you sent? And, in our mind, there should be a lot of considerations around kind of keeping your house clean in terms of logging, as well as all of the other pillars of observability. But cost shouldn't be one of them. You should have to think about it in terms of what am I going to need later on? How am I going to be able to go and find it as quickly when you know things become tough? I was going to use a terminology that's a little bit more rough over there that we've all felt in the moment of truth. But when things become tough, ultimately, you're going to want the data that you're going to need. And that's what we're trying to break over here at Ground Cover. Now, there's a lot of open source solutions as well. We use some of those kind of embedded within Ground Cover, and we get a ton of value on top of it. But the issues that you encounter when you use open source solution is one, you need all the best kind of practices, all of the know-how. You need employees to go and be responsible for that maintenance, versioning, scale, and so on. And that in turn has a dollar cost associated with it as well. You don't feel it as much as that bill that comes in every month from our competitors, but you're going to feel it in terms of the velocity that your team could go and achieve in different fronts. In addition to that, you do have kind of these challenges when it comes to correlating your data. So logs in and of itself is nice, but a lot of the value that we see at Ground Cover is actually taking logs, overlaying it with traces and metrics, and in the moment of truth saying something happened, how do I look across those three and dive in and really quickly understand what happened, but then really quickly understand where it originated, how did it happen, what else does it impact, and be able to just kind of trade off between those different views very quickly. And that's something that is extremely difficult to do. Just adding different types of metadata around where did the log come from in Kubernetes, what pod created, what container, and so on, in and of itself poses a challenge and overhead. So now imagine creating a correspondence between traces and metrics when you live in a pure open source world. It is extremely difficult and almost impossible to do at a scale of company that isn't super large.
So we talked about cost and kind of the relationship between the amount of logs that you monitor versus the cost that ends up costing you. And so that's one of the main things that we set out to change with groundcover. Now, interestingly, we didn't start off by focusing on logs specifically, but we very quickly realized that this area presents a huge gap that no one can really answer effectively. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the power of ground cover, the journey that we set out kind of started with this idea of a agent of eBPF, a sensor that essentially just goes and, like magic, you install it for 1 minute and you see absolutely everything that's happening in your cluster. And we started in the world of traces. We started in that place of, okay, you could install it and you'll see every request and every response for all of the traces that matter to you. And then we built on top of that metrics that could be created on the edge, so that the cost component here will be super minimal compared to our competitors. But then what we realized is kind of the overlap and the correlation between these different pillars, the logs, the traces, and the metrics, is super powerful. And we want to be a holistic one-stop shop. We are a holistic one-stop shop for observability. And that's why it's so important for us to go and build in a logging solution that aligns to our principles of going in and having all of the pricing be extremely transparent, all of it be not based off of volume or consumption in any way, but at the same time enable you to be able to get the best out of it. And those are kind of our trade-offs that we had to think about, and that's why we were able to go and build something that's so powerful as ground cover. And if we talk about the process, you install it for a minute or two, and then you will go and begin to see all of your other metrics and traces, but also logs just out of the box. And you could actually go and integrate logs as well from other sources that aren't Kubernetes if you want to go and to feed into ground cover as well.
Right. So essentially, our pricing is based on nodes and not the volume of data that you monitor. So you really have total freedom and control. We're the only ones that are priced this way, and it actually enables us to enables our users to monitor as many logs as they choose with no additional costs whatsoever. What are additional advantages?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just as many logs as you want. It's also concepts like retention. And other competitors, retention will be a factor into pricing. Here, you choose the retention that's right for you. There's no concept of rehydration here. I mean, everything you want to have over there that you want to have access to it, get the value that you need from that data. And I think that's, really, really powerful. But it's also kind of this aspect of the correlation between the traces, the metrics, and the logs that I'll be able to show in just a moment during the demo.
Cool. So, kind of wrapping up what we've talked about so far, we've talked about what logs are, what they're used for, who the main users of logs are, some of the best practices that are out there, and what we recommend doing. And we also explained Groundcover's approach to log management and what our vision is for our users in that aspect. Now, I think it's now time to the main event, what many of the listeners are here to see. And these are, that's basically the platform and what ground covers offer for log management within the platform. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and then you can share your screen and kind of walk them around the platform.
Sounds great. Favorite part of the day. Okay, cool. So obviously there's endless things that could happen within ground cover, and I'll touch on some of them, but we are focused kind of with the mindset of logs here. So I'll go and have that be the primary piece that we go and show today. So When I go and look at my left nav over here, I have a number of different use cases that I could go and solve for. I could look at all of my different workloads and their golden signals. I could go over here and look at the core infrastructure. I could look at a service map over here really easily where I could see all of the communication. But when we look at kind of the area that we're talking about today, logs, I could actually go over here and see all of the logs that are picked up by ground cover. Now, if I go, I could see I have a number of different formats of logs over here. I'm going to go and click on JSON for today, and I see that I'm able to go into to look at my different types of log levels here. So let's go ahead and filter down for error. You'll notice over here, all of these are filterable up top. And I'll show you just in a moment, but we're actually able to filter on all of the log attributes themselves as well. So I could go over here and I see my message, I see my timestamp severity. If I had any number of other attributes over here, I'd be able to filter by them and ultimately to go and to start with a problem and to narrow it down. But another really cool aspect here is that I could actually go and see all of the metadata around where this log came from. So I could see the container, image, actually git commit that went and created this, namespace, pod, and so on. But I could also see it in the context of memory and CPU used within the container and over here on a node level as well. So imagine now you have a certain error and you go and you see a spike over here in terms of CPU or memory on either a container or a node level. You'd be able very quickly to understand the impact of that error log item, and you'd be able to go and understand, is that something super urgent to take care of or not? Now, I spoke a few times during this webinar about correlation, and I think over here you're able to correlate logs to infrastructure metrics, but you're also able to correlate logs to traces. So you see over here, I have this red button, red dot over there. If I click on traces, I'm actually able to see out of the corresponding pod over there, what was the relevant traces that are of type error over here. So I could click on this and I could actually see that I received a error on this insert where I attempted to insert into a certain table name, and I went and received this trace where I'm able to see the payload associated with it as well, where it says you have an error in your SQL syntax, please check, and so on. So I started with a log line that was an error. I moved to checking where it was created out of, saw context around a container and a node level, and then I was able to move out to any corresponding traces that were problematic. So I'm actually seeing kind of like a 360 of what's happening. And then from here, I can move any number of different areas. So if we're talking, about aspects over here of the workload, the service that essentially ran this, I could click on that and then look over here and see what happened on a service level over here as well. It goes both ways. So I could start from a trace as well. And let's see if we could find the example of that. If we have a trace over here, I could go through my traces. And if I have a trace with a log error associated with it, I will have a red button over here and I'll be able to get to logs. So we saw it now. I could get to the corresponding logs over here and I could click through to it. So it's kind of a two-way correspondence here where you could start with a log, get to the corresponding traces, metrics, workload or services. And we could also start with a trace and get to corresponding logs. So you're really able to get that 360 and get all of the value out of it. I'm going to go ahead and stop over here, I think, because that's kind of the focus of today's webinar, and give it back to you, Joe.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. I was just gonna tell you to stop sharing the screen. Cool. Thanks very much. That's super interesting. Or I think we we're able to offer the 360 view of the logs and correlate them and put them into context with the traces and metrics too. I think it's super valuable for our users. I think that's one of the most recurring feedbacks is everything that you can do within the platform, starting with the logs. And I really urge everybody to that's not yet a user of groundcover to just go check out groundcover.com. You can start for free. We have a free tier So you can just go ahead and start using that immediately. I think this wraps up our webinar for today, our masterclass. We have masterclasses every 2 weeks. So there's going to be one coming up in 2 weeks as well. We're going to share some more information about that. I want to thank everybody who joined this session today. I want to thank you, Or, also for being here and for walking us through the platform and all your insights on log management. Yeah, unless there's any last comments that you wanted to finish with.
No, it was great to be here. It was great talking to you, Jill. I'll say that we love kind of getting feedback in our Slack community. Any questions you may have, any follow ups that you may have, feel free. Extremely active community. And we love it when you guys go and join over there and just give us your thoughts. So,
Yeah,
great
100.
seeing you today and great talking.
100%. Reach out to us anytime with any comments, any questions. Happy to help. And we really hope to see everybody on the next masterclass. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, guys.